What's up guys, I'm going to do another PlayStation 4 Pro video, and this time I'm going to be doing a review of it and just giving my honest impressions of it and thoughts and everything, and kind of whether or not you guys should buy the console. So I've had my PlayStation 4 Pro for about 3 weeks now, and I can safely say that I think it was a good purchase, but this video is about whether it is a good purchase for you, so I'm going to start out with some pros and cons of it, and then I'm going to talk about my experience with it in the end. So the first pro that I have written down about the PlayStation 4 Pro is that you will have a better PlayStation VR experience. So if you are fortunate enough to have a PlayStation 4 Pro and a PlayStation VR, then certain games will be able to take advantage of the PlayStation 4 Pro's upgraded hardware, and you'll be able to get better looking games with better shadows, textures, resolution, etc. And when you have like a screen like less than 4 inches from your face and from your eyes, then that stuff is really crucial, and it will just make the whole experience a whole lot better. Also, frame rates will be a bit better, so that way the games are a bit smoother and it'll be a little bit less jarring. So the second one is that it's only $400. So this was something that was really crazy when we first started hearing about the PlayStation 4 Pro and everything like that it's going to be this 4K gaming console. And so we were wondering, like, how much is this going to cost? And this is a controversy about Microsoft's Xbox One Scorpio, is that if it does native 4K, the console is going to cost a whole lot of money, and it'll probably be like $500, $600, and even high-end PCs can barely hit 4K now, and that will cost you about like $1,200 just to reach that point. It's a really great cost for a PlayStation 4. So previously, the PlayStation 4, when it launched, it was $400, and then it started dropping a little bit in price. But for the upgraded model of the PlayStation 4 to be the exact same price as the original, that's incredible. And I think that's just awesome that we have this brand new system with upgraded hardware that is the exact same price as the original model. And I also like that they dropped down the base PlayStation 4 price, so they no longer sell the original like PlayStation 4s. They only sell like the PlayStation 4 Slim and the PlayStation 4 Pro, and the Slim is like $100 cheaper than the Pro. So if you have the extra money and you want to get the Pro for better looking games and stuff, it's only $400. It's not that much money. And that ties into this third point, is that it's only $100 more than the PlayStation 4 Slim. So if you don't currently have a PlayStation 4 and you're looking to buy one, you're like, I could spend $300 on a PlayStation 4 Slim, or I could spend $100 extra and get the PlayStation 4 Pro, which is the best model out there, top of the line, and you'll be able to play 4K games. So my next point isn't necessarily a pro, but it's also not necessarily a con of this system. But the PlayStation 4 Pro, in most games, it's not true native 4K, but it still looks better on a 4K TV than a normal PlayStation 4 Pro. So if you have the PlayStation 4 Pro and you have a 4K TV, games will look way better than if you were to just have like an original PlayStation 4 or a PlayStation 4 Slim or anything like that. And that's one of the main selling points of this console, is that if you have a 4K TV, you can get this console and you can get games that look better than a 1080p TV or monitor and an original PlayStation 4. Next up is another added benefit of this, is that it does 4K media. So what I'm talking about here is like Netflix, YouTube, Hulu, stuff like that. And you can view all these things at 4K, whereas on the previous console, the PlayStation 4, just the base model, and even on the Slim, you could only watch 1080p. So if you do have a 4K TV, you can use this to watch 4K YouTube, 4K Netflix. And it also has HDR, and if you have an HDR TV, then you'll also be able to take advantage of that. So my sixth point here is that it has a 1TB hard drive. I absolutely love this. It's seriously so incredible. I've desperately been needing this for a long time. And my original PlayStation 4 I didn't use very much. I only had a couple games installed. I only had NBA 2K16, Black Ops 3, Advanced Warfare, and Infinite Warfare, and a couple other games, and that had already completely filled up my original PlayStation 4's hard drive. And so that's just kind of a problem I've had with that console, is that I have filled up that hard drive so quick that I was constantly finding myself deleting games, reinstalling them, downloading them, stuff like that, where it's like I could only play like 4 or 5 games, like huge AAA games on my system at once before my whole hard drive is full. And if I wanted to play this other game, because everybody randomly gets that urge, oh, I want to go back and I want to play this random game, and so they, will just usually boot up their system and start playing it. Whereas on the PlayStation 4, I would have to re-download that whole game, and then I'd have to play it. And usually, when I want to play like a little throwback to some of these games, I only want to play it for like a couple hours. And so if I'm sitting here waiting for like 5 hours for the game to download, only to play it for like an hour, it's just not worth it. So a 1 terabyte hard drive with this system is desperately needed, and I really love it, and I've yet to fill it up, which is fantastic. I've just been downloading things like crazy. I've got Infinite Warfare, Modern Warfare Remastered, Battlefield 1, Titanfall 2, Last of Us, Battlefront, all these games on here, and it's still not full. I'm just like, yes, I can finally have all these games that I really want to play on my system all at once without having to delete some of them and download others and stuff like that, whereas I could only have a couple of them on my original PlayStation 4. The next thing is that the PlayStation 4 Pro is the cheapest 4K gaming experience. So for $400 you can game at 4K. So when I keep going like 4K, I mean that it's not always native 4K, that it's usually upscaled from either 1080p, 1440p, like 1600 or 1800p, up to 4K, and it uses checkerboard upscaling or checkerboard rendering to make it appear as a 4K image instead of like a straight up 3840 by 2160 image. But don't get me wrong, there are a couple games out there that do support native 4K. The Last of Us Remastered is one that comes to mind that does support native 4K, and that's just incredible that that game does native 4K, and it looks beautiful. So if you have a 4K TV and a PlayStation 4 Pro, then you can play that game at 4K, and that's just awesome that for $400 you can play video games at 4K. And the last part I have on here is that it has 5 GHz Wi-Fi support. So I absolutely love this, because if you have a lot of devices connected to your Wi-Fi, or just a lot of devices in general around, if you live in like a crowded city or something like that, a lot of these Wi-Fi channels or Wi-Fi bands can get crowded and can end up slowing down your connection, so that way you don't get the fastest speeds. You don't get the speeds that you're actually paying for. You don't get the lowest latency. You're always kind of getting gypped in this way. But you can switch over to 5 GHz Wi-Fi if your router supports it, so that way you can be getting better speeds and less latency. So now on to the cons. So the first one is that some games will run worse on the PlayStation 4 Pro. Some games will run at like a locked 60 frames per second on the original PlayStation 4, but when you play that game on the PlayStation 4 Pro, it'll drop down to like 40 or 50 frames per second. And that's just ridiculous that it runs worse than this older hardware. That, granted, it is at like a higher resolution and whatnot, but you still get more frame rate dips. And this is something a lot of people have brought up, is that instead of Sony trying to push games to run at native 4K, they should just gloss over all of the previous games that they've made, all the games on the system, and just make them all straight up 1080p, 60 FPS, which is like the highest textures and really good settings with, like high anti-aliasing, texture filtering, all this kind of stuff. And just make all these games look beautiful and super smooth, instead of trying to go to 4K with all these compromises like 30 frames per second, all these frame rate drops, slower shadow quality, stuff like that. So I think they should just make all games run better, and that's some of the technical specifications of the PlayStation 4 Pro, was that all games were supposed to run better than the original model, but in many cases a lot of these games don't do it, and they in fact run worse on the PlayStation 4 Pro. So I'll link a video from Digital Foundry down in the description if you want to learn more about that. But the second point on here is that HDR isn't a selling point of the PlayStation 4 Pro. So this is a little bit contradictory as to what I said before about this having HDR support, but the thing is about this system is that HDR really isn't a selling point over like the PlayStation 4 Slim or something. So if you're comparing the PlayStation 4 Pro and the PlayStation 4 Slim, then they both have HDR. So there's no reason that you should go for the PlayStation 4 Pro versus the Slim if you just care about HDR, because they both have it. so you're essentially paying $100 more for nothing. Granted, you do get more features and whatnot, but still, HDR isn't really a selling point because every PlayStation 4 now has HDR support. So even if you have like the launch model from 2013, you will be able to use HDR on it and your games will already look better. So you don't need to necessarily upgrade to a PlayStation 4 Pro in order to take advantage of HDR. So speaking of HDR, HDR does not do a thing for you unless you have an HDR display. So I see a lot of people saying like, oh, I don't really see a difference with HDR. And that's a hurdle about marketing HDR, is that you can't really market HDR because very few people actually have a way of viewing HDR. So this is something that came up when they first unveiled the PlayStation 4 Pro, was that they showed off a bunch of gameplay of games with the HDR enabled, but most people couldn't see it. They're just using SDR TVs, so they just saw the exact same thing as if HDR was turned off. So the only way you'll ever be able to take advantage of HDR and actually see the difference is if you have an HDR display. So I came across this fantastic example of HDR on Reddit. So somebody described it as trying to view colored television on a black and white TV. It will literally do nothing for you. Even if you have a colored source, as long as you're playing it on a black and white TV, you will not see a single difference on it. And that's the exact same way with HDR, is that unless you're watching it on an HDR display, you're not going to be able to see any difference. Next up, there is not a noticeable enough difference on a standard 1080p TV or monitor to warrant an upgrade or to purchase this console outright. So if you just have a 1080p TV or something like that, that's what almost everybody has right now. You can see benefits in some games, with some games looking sharper, but there's not a noticeable enough difference. There's no reason that you should actively go out and spend $400 on a PlayStation 4 Pro just to see this tiny insignificant improvement. Some games will be downsampled to 1080p and will look a bit sharper on the PlayStation 4 Pro, even at 1080p, but still, it's like I said, it's not worthy of $400 just for that small upgrade. And lastly, I think this is huge for the PlayStation 4 Pro, is that unless a game is specifically patched to take advantage of the upgraded hardware in the PlayStation 4 Pro, it will run the exact same, or potentially even worse, than the original PlayStation 4. There will be no difference. So say you want to play a game like Battlefield 4 that came out on the original PlayStation 4 at launch, you want to play that game on your PlayStation 4 Pro, and you're like, oh man, I can't wait to play this at a higher frame rate, higher resolutions and stuff. Well, that game hasn't been updated to take advantage of the PlayStation 4 Pro, so it's going to be playing at the exact same resolution, exact same frame rates, exact same everything as the original PlayStation 4. So they downclock the CPU and GPU to match the original PlayStation 4. And I think this is pretty bogus, because there's only a small list of games that have been updated to take advantage of the PlayStation 4. So all these other games won't have any effect. They'll run the exact same. So if a game ran at 30 frames per second, but he was constantly dipping to like the low 20s or something, and you were like, oh, okay, I'm going to buy a PlayStation 4 Pro, and when I'm going to play this game on here, it should have no problem running this game at 30 frames per second. It should be perfectly smooth, and it should just be excellent on the PlayStation 4 Pro. Well, it turns out, as long as that game hasn't been updated, it will still run at the same frame rate as the original PlayStation 4. I think this is a ridiculous decision, because if you're going to spend $400 on a brand new console, then you should at least be able to see a difference in games. And I'm not talking like the 25, maybe 30 games that have been updated to take advantage of the PlayStation 4 Pro. I think that if you spend $400 on this brand new console, you should be able to see a clear upgrade and a clear difference across the board with everything. Any game that you want to play, it should run better and it should look better on the PlayStation 4 Pro. So there you guys go. That is my pros and cons list for the PlayStation 4 Pro. With my experience with it, I like it, but like I said before, there is not a noticeable enough upgrade or difference on a 1080p screen than the original PlayStation 4. That's all I have. I just have a normal 1080p monitor. It's not HDR, it's not 4K, So there is such a small difference between running a game on the original PlayStation 4 versus running it on the Pro for me that I don't think it was worth $400 to spend in that spot. But if you are planning on buying a 4K monitor or something like me, a 4K HDR monitor like me, then you are trying to kind of future-proof yourself, then sure, this is a worthy investment. But if you are just, content with your 1080p screen and you are just fine and you're not planning on upgrading to 4K or HDR anytime soon, then the original PlayStation 4 will do just fine. And it will provide you virtually the exact same experience for $100 less. Another reason I upgraded to the PlayStation 4 Pro was that I love the 1TB hard drive. Like I said before, I like having the ability to have more than like 5 games on my hard drive without having to delete stuff and then re-download other things. I like just having them all on my system. That way, if I feel like I want to play a certain game, I just click on it and I can play it. I don't have to wait a couple hours for it to download. The 1TB hard drive is really awesome. But the last thing I want to talk about my initial thoughts on this, is just kind of about how the PlayStation 4 Pro has just changed my whole PlayStation 4 experience. So I bought a PlayStation 4 very early this year, in January of this year, and I used it quite a bit when I first got it, and after about a week, I was like, okay, this kind of sucks. I really didn't like it. I was like, I would rather play on my Xbox. That's where all my friends are. That's where all my games are and everything like that. And I didn't really see a reason to be playing games on my PlayStation 4 when I had the exact same games already in progress on my Xbox One, plus I could play with my friends on there. So throughout this year, I have probably used my original PlayStation 4 less than 100 times, and this is over like 11 months at this point. Whereas I guarantee that I've played my Xbox One over 1,000 times just this year. I really just wasn't satisfied with my original PlayStation 4, and I was kind of, regretting the purchase. I bought it for $400, and then within like a week, I was like, ooh, that was kind of a bad decision. I could have spent $400 on literally anything else, and I probably would have had a better time. But when I got my PlayStation 4 Pro, I've been using it just about almost every other day, and this is just because of school, work, and other things going on in my life. But right now, I think I'm doing a good job of switching off between my PlayStation 4 and my Xbox One. So I think I'm doing a good job balancing it, that I will use, if I want to play a game with my friends or anything like that, I'll play it on my Xbox One. But if I just want to play a game alone, or if I want to play a specific game, I'll play on my PlayStation 4. And I don't know specifically what it is about the Pro, but for some reason I've just been playing it a whole lot more lately. That I've played it more lately than I almost ever have on my original PlayStation 4. That I think I'm doing a really good job of switching off between them and getting my money's worth out of the Pro. And I really think that the Pro was a really good purchase, even though, like I said before, it doesn't have a huge impact on me because I don't have a 4K or an HDR TV. But I really like it, so that leads me into my kind of final thoughts on this and whether or not you guys should buy a PlayStation 4 Pro. So I'm going to kind of give a mixed response here. So I would say yes, buy a PlayStation 4 Pro and kind of future-proof yourself a little bit. That way, when in the future 4K HDR TVs and stuff will drop down in price and become as commonplace as a 1080p TV that we have now, you will already have a console ready and waiting for you to take advantage of it. But at the same time, I would also say no, that if you are just kind of content with your 1080p TV right now, then I would say stick to the original PlayStation 4. If you already have one, then great. There's no need to upgrade. But if you don't have one, I would say buy a PlayStation 4 Pro instead. So if you already have a PlayStation 4, I say don't upgrade to the Pro. But if you don't have one at all, I say get the Pro, because it's only $100 more, and over the lifespan of this console, games are going to look way better on the PlayStation 4 Pro, and it's just going to be such a worthy investment in the future. At this time, like I said, if you already have a PlayStation 4, don't buy it. If you don't have a PlayStation 4 at all, do buy it. So this is kind of how reviews have been about this whole system in general, is that it's kind of a mixed bag of people saying, should you buy it, should you not? Like I said, if you don't have a PlayStation 4, buy it. If you do, don't buy it. It's that simple, And if you really want it, who am I to, tell you not to buy it? You can do whatever you want. So there you guys go. That's just my 2 cents about the PlayStation 4 Pro. Tell me what you guys think of it in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next video.